Hey, so welcome to all of you. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over this quiz on the metabolism quiz. The marks are really good. Okay, average was a little bit higher than normal. It's about a 75 to 76 average, which is good. Also keeping in mind that I marked a little bit more lenient than I normally mark, just because I wanted people to have a good chance at midterm of getting into university and securing their spot. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go through it today. Now, a couple other things. Just a reminder, if this video is too small and you're like, I can't see what's going on, you can just go into YouTube, type in Mr. Bunning, and then you can full size all of these videos. But let's go into our quiz. So here's our quiz, and I'm just going to kind of go through the answers. So first one, chemical reaction will acquire energy if it is endergonic. So our first one is D. Okay, so one is D. 2, ATP releases energy to make ADP and PI. This is... Well, I was accepting two answers here, either exergonic, okay, which would be B, or you could have said D. Okay, so it's either B or D for this. Okay, ATP is the currency of the cell because it powers cellular activities. So 3 is B. What does ATP consist of? An adenosine, a ribose, and 3 phosphates. So number 4 is D. Number 5, ATP is used to drive endergonic reactions. So 5 is D. 6 is also D. Coupled reactions involve exergonic reactions driving an endergonic reaction. So that will come up a little bit later. Number 7, aerobic respiration requires all of these. Requires glucose, ATP, oxygen, and neutralization. So it requires all of them. Aerobic respiration normally follows, well, we've got... B, glycolysis, then pyruvate oxidation in the Krebs cycle. Number 9, pyruvate is D, oxidized before joining the Krebs cycle. We call it pyruvate oxidation is the name of the kind of the cycle before we go into the Krebs cycle. So it's oxidized. Okay, number 10, acetyl-coenzyme A enters the Krebs cycle. Okay, 10C. So during pyruvate oxidation, pyruvate is converted to acetyl-CoA or acetyl-coenzyme A, and that enters the Krebs cycle. Number 11, the Krebs cycle produces all of these. So 11 is D, it produces all of these for one turn of the Krebs cycle. Okay? Now for number 12, okay, the Krebs cycle is going to turn twice for each glucose molecule. Okay? Because remember, glucose is going to be converted into 2 pyruvates. Each of those pyruvates is going to be converted into acetyl-CoA. So we got 2 acetyl-CoAs. Well, each acetyl-CoA is going to go through the Krebs cycle, so we have to double this. So this is what was produced from one turn of the Krebs cycle, but one glucose is going to make the Krebs cycle turn twice. Okay, so our answer here for number 12 is D. Okay, we got 6 NADHs. We've got 3 NADHs from one turn, but a glucose will make it turn twice, so we've got our answer for number 12 is D, 6 NADHs. Okay. Number 13, what is the product of pyruvate that enters the pyruvate oxidation that enters the Krebs cycle? Okay, number 13, I accepted any of these. Okay, any of the answers would have worked. I thought it was a poorly answered or a poor question, so I accepted any answer for 13. Number 14, how many carbons from glucose enter the Krebs cycle? There's 4. Okay, 2 pyruvates are going to get converted into acetyl-CoAs. Each acetyl-CoA is 2 carbons long, and you've got 2 of them, so 4 carbons normally. Okay, when we enter the Krebs cycle, we've already lost 2 carbons from glucose off to CO2. So glucose was originally 6 carbons long. We lost 2 to CO2, so we have 4 carbons entering the Krebs cycle. Okay, now so that was D. 15, it combines with citrate. So 15 is A. 16, oxidative phosphorylation occurs in the inner membrane of the mitochondria. Okay, the pyruvate oxidation and the Krebs cycles in the matrix, and then glycolysis in the cytosol. Number 17, I accepted C or E. Okay, the real answer here is C. Okay, so that they're going to be basically you move electrons through oxidation and reduction is the main thing. Okay, so 17 was C. 18, during the Krebs cycle, NAD+. This was kind of a tricky one. It picks up 2 electrons and 1 H+ ion. So 18 was E. Okay, and these are, again, some of the small details that you need to know if you want to get, the high 80s, low 90s in this class. All right. After the electrons travel through the transport chain, they are finally accepted by oxygen. Okay, that's why we need to breathe in oxygen, is their final acceptor of electrons. So the answer here is 19 is D. They combine with H plus ions and O2 to make H2O. Okay, and that's why we make H2O during cellular respiration. 20, I accepted any of them. Okay, I thought it was kind of, again, not a very good question, so I accepted any answer for 20. Also for 21. Okay, I accepted any answer for 20 and 21. For 22, I didn't. I wanted ethanol. Okay, so 22 is A, ethanol. All right, getting to the short answer. Okay, so everybody's pretty good on here. Okay, where some people went wrong, if you wanted to get full marks during A to B, you couldn't have written that lactic acid levels begin to rise immediately. They're not going to rise immediately. You're going to have to burn off all of that oxygen that you already have in your body before you go into aerobic. So if I start from scratch sprinting, I'm not going to immediately start producing lactic acid. I'm going to immediately first go into aerobic respiration, and then once I wear out my oxygen, then I'll switch over into anaerobic. So for full marks here, you had to put that, originally lactic acid levels would remain low, and then they would begin to rise as you switched over from aerobic into anaerobic. Okay? From B to C, when they're walking, they should be lowering their lactic acid levels because now you have a surplus of oxygen. So all that lactic acid that you built up from A to B, you're now going to start to break down during B to C because you're walking. Now also it's important to remember the lactic acid gets converted to pyruvate. It doesn't get converted to CO2 and H2O. Lactic acid will be converted back to pyruvate when there's enough oxygen. Okay? When it sprints again, you're going to start building up lactic acid. And when they're pacing themselves, when they're pacing themselves, lactic acid levels won't be changing. Okay? They're going to be at a set state because you're not producing too much oxygen to start breaking down lactic acid, but you're not producing too little of oxygen that you're building it up. So you're kind of right at this standstill where lactic acid levels won't be changing. Okay. Second one, what does the term coupled reaction imply? In a coupled reaction, they're implying that an exergonic reaction is releasing energy in order to derive an endergonic reaction. That's why they're coupled. Okay, now you can't say the products of one reaction are used as the reactants of another because energy is not a product. In order to be a product, you have to be matter. So energy is not a product of a reaction. It is released during a reaction, but it's not a product of a reaction. Okay? So number 3, if you suspected the mitochondria in certain muscles have been destroyed, what test would you perform to verify these mitochondria in these specific cells have been destroyed? So what I was looking for is that you could take a sample of the muscle cells. Okay, so you're going to take a sample of the muscle cells, you're going to give them lots of oxygen, and you're going to require them to do exercise, and you're going to see how quickly they fatigue. Okay, if there's a surplus of oxygen for the muscle and it's still fatiguing very quickly or building up lactic acid levels very quickly, then it implies that there's no mitochondria. Because if there was a surplus of oxygen and a mitochondria, then you would go through aerobic respiration. Okay? But knowing that it's damaged means that you wouldn't be able to perform aerobic respiration even though there's plenty of oxygen there, and you'd be forming anaerobic and lactic acid levels would begin to rise. Okay? Now keep in mind that you have to check inside the cells. Some people put, I'm going to check the bloodstream, which is technically a good idea, but you can't really check the bloodstream because all the other muscles or all the other parts of the body that are functioning fine are going to start sending in acetyl-CoAs and all these different indicators of aerobic respiration. So you really want to take a sample of the muscle cells specifically and check what's inside of those muscle cells, not check what's inside the bloodstream. Okay, so which process came first, aerobic or anaerobic? So anaerobic came first, okay, for some of the reasons. So one of the reasons is that the Earth originally had no oxygen. So our first living things wouldn't have been able to perform anaerobic because there was no oxygen on Earth. Okay, the second thing was the first living organisms are bacteria. Now, bacteria don't have a mitochondria. Okay, they lack complex organelles, so they don't even have a mitochondria. So they're incapable of performing aerobic respiration. Okay? Then you could have talked about that there's very simple organisms. Very simple organisms, bacteria, don't need to provide tons and tons of ATP. So why would they provide all this extra energy if they don't need it? And then you could talk about the fact that later on, when eukaryotes evolved, they are more complicated. They need a lot of reactions to happen, so they need to perform aerobic cellular respiration. Okay. So number 6, how does this unit relate to the other? There was a lot of different answers here. Again, if you wanted to get 5 out of 5, you had to have a really, really good relation from our previous unit to this unit. So the big things that I was looking for is our first unit talked about how we build the cell. What do we need in order to build a cell? The basic components to build a cell, and then what are they? What are they used for? So why do we need to have carbohydrates? Why do we need to have proteins? Where are they going when we build a cell? And in the second part, what we're talking about running a cell. So we're talking about, after the cell's already been built, because we know about how it's built from the first unit, now we're going to talk about how we run the cell. And the main thing about running a cell is you need to have energy, and we went through on how to create energy. Okay? All right, number 7. So if you're going to compare two people, one eating carbohydrates and one eating protein, okay, they're going to be similar because they're both going to go through cellular respiration. Okay, so they're both going to go through the phases of potentially glycolysis, and then pyruvate oxidation, the Krebs cycle, and then oxidative phosphorylation. They're also both going to be creating energy. So they're going to be burning these macromolecules in order to create energy. However, there's going to be some differences. Okay? With carbohydrates, you're going to be going through the entire cellular respiration cycle. You're going to begin with glycolysis and then work your way all the way through the stages. Okay? Now with protein, it's going to be a little bit different, where protein can enter into the cellular respiration pathway at different points. Sometimes protein will enter in glycolysis. Okay? Other types of protein will skip glycolysis altogether and enter into pyruvate oxidation. Okay? Other types of protein will skip glycolysis and pyruvate oxidation and then enter directly into the Krebs cycle. So if you're just eating pure protein, you're not going to get as much ATP as someone who's going through glycolysis, because glycolysis, you produce 2 ATP at the very beginning. And if you entered into the Krebs cycle, you wouldn't be able to produce those original 2 ATPs. Okay? So the big difference is where they're entering cellular respiration in. Carbohydrates at the very beginning, proteins can enter in at 3 different spots: glycolysis, into pyruvate oxidation, and then directly into the Krebs cycle. Okay, and the last one. Why do you think some organisms large organisms can't survive in areas that lack oxygen? Okay. Well, our big answer there is that if you're a big organism, okay, like something like myself, you're performing thousands and thousands and thousands of reactions all at the same time. So inside my body, there's thousands and thousands of reactions going on. Well, a lot of those reactions require energy. Okay? So we need to produce a tremendous amount of energy in order to produce or to be able to run all of the reactions going on in our large bodies. When you're a very, very small organism like a bacteria, you don't have a lot of reactions. So you can live in an area that lacks oxygen because you don't need to have a ton of energy. But when you're a big organism, you need to provide lots of different reactions. You need lots of energy for that. And simply doing anaerobic respiration would not provide enough energy for large organisms. So any areas that is oxygen depleted or in an anoxic environment, which is another way of saying that there's no oxygen, they're only small, simple organisms that can survive. If you're a larger organism, you would never be able to survive in an area that lacks oxygen because you just can't produce enough energy to drive all your reactions. Okay? So I hope that helped. Let me know if you have any questions or concerns about the quiz. Make sure I graded your thing correctly, and don't be shy if I marked your test wrong to send me an email. Okay? Because I'm only human and I make mistakes, especially when marking. Okay? If I gave you too many marks, just keep quiet about it, and that probably happened more often than it should on this quiz. Okay? And I did that kind of on purpose to make sure that people had some good marks going into midterms. So if you got too many marks, just keep quiet about it. But if I shafted you marks, for sure, let me know.